Hey everyone, and welcome to RPG Horror Stories with D&D Doge. In today's video, we have a tale about a dungeon master that tries to implement permanent debuffs to a player for missing a session. A story about a DM dealing with a unique horny bard stereotype. And then we cap everything off with this week's D&D glory story. But before we get into those, if you like what I do here, I hope that you would consider subscribing to the channel if you aren't already. We're getting really close to 20k, and I would like to see if we can get there by July. If not for me, then how about a clip of Ziggy enjoying his new toy? Well, I'd say that toy is a hit. But with that said, let's get into these stories. DM decides permanent exhaustion points are a good punishment for missing sessions. Sessions get weirder after. By Reddit user, Surely Not an Automata. I, some months ago, got into a Descent into Avernus game. Things started reasonably well, and the DM did a fairly good job, and obviously put a lot of work into remaking the maps on Dungeon Craft, for example. But there were weird choices from the start. He had some module installed on Foundry that made random critical fumbles at a Nat 1, and those ranged from basically nothing happens to combat breaking stuff. I distinctly remember one that just broke your weapon, and yes, even if it was magical or story relevant, and another one that emptied your spell slots if you're a spellcaster. Imagine that happening at level 20. What really threw me off was, on an occasion that I missed 2 sessions because of some really personal stuff. I just let them know that I wouldn't be able to make that session, and I guess my mistake was that I didn't choose to elaborate on why. Then, at the session I got to go on, he told me to add 2 exhaustion points. I asked why, and he said it was because of the missed sessions. So I asked if it was just for the session, and he said, "No, they are permanent, even if your character dies and you roll up a new one." So I said, okay, I'm leaving the table then, because I was playing a frickin' bard, and I won't bother playing with disadvantage on all ability checks, with the class most focused on them. Not to mention, the half speed can be deadly. He then, probably not wanting to deal with recruiting another player, decided to retract it and make it so you lose 1 point at the end of the session. Unfortunately, that was enough to make me try and stay, partially out of respect for the amount of extra work and paid resources he was using to run the game. Then comes a person that I don't know if I can call a that guy, but he was definitely a guy. I'll just call him Barbarian. I later learned that he was playing a chaotic evil character, and yeah, I could tell. First, it started with him being an incredibly loud and intense character, or just a guy, as I'm not sure if he's naturally like that. But he would constantly get in between negotiations or social interactions, instigating violence, and sometimes get over on people's plans for diplomacy, which was constant with me, because Bard. The surprise for me is when we invade a mansion, and with a certain NPC villain that is disabled and has spies, people who ran or played the module might recognize, the Barbarian threatens to rape him if he doesn't give us information. The DM asked for clarification if his character was willing to realize that threat if he doesn't get the info, or if it's a bluff, in order to determine whether it be intimidation or deception. And of course, he says that he is absolutely willing. That was really out of nowhere to me, because they didn't mention this as a possibility in the game. I mean, I'm not triggered by it, and I don't think anyone at the table was, but still, I think it should have been mentioned that it was a possibility to be in the game. After some sessions, we are robbed by a gang of small children that take some of our purses, including mine and the Barbarian's. We find one of them, and the Barbarian tortures the kid to the point of breaking his arm to get info on where the other children are. Mind you, that's after I suggest, I don't know, charm person or suggestion. All of this changed when, just after level 5, I think, The DM takes us to Candledeep, and we try to buy and sell some magic items. The DM basically has the shopkeep let us freely draw from a deck of many things. And for context, my character was addicted to gambling by his backstory. So by this being explained to him, and his very low wisdom, it was basically metagaming for him to not draw from it. But another player draws first, and then mine would be second. This was apparently an on-the-fly decision by the DM, because he hadn't prepared the deck. So he solved that by counting the number of cards, and having us roll a dice equal to the number of cards. Me and the other player roll at the same time, but his comes out on top. And while the DM is counting the first player's roll in the book, me, with my physical book, am counting mine. And then bam, it was Moon. If you don't know, that means I get 1d3 wishes, and you could imagine my giddiness. When the DM goes to count mine, he takes a bit, and then says something different. It was Skull, which means my character has to fight an avatar of death. I get confused, but think that he might be using some other list. Though he leaves that for later, while the same first character, that got something that did nothing, which was inversing alignment while true neutral, draws again, and bam, the same number as mine, so he got Skull as well. Wait a minute, aren't the cards supposed to disappear after they are pulled? So then how did that player pull Skull as well? So, there are now two characters fighting death, and which one do you think won? The fighter with a legendary shield with fireballs and a wall of fire. It was +2 I think. But AC didn't matter because the enemy automatically hit. Or the bard with support spells. The results were predictable. At the time, I was okay with it because it was a fitting end for an addicted gambler. Well, I don't know. I feel that is a bit extreme for someone that's just addicted to gambling. And I started making a new character, which was a Hexadin. But after we, descended into Avernus, I don't think that's a spoiler. We get 2 sessions of only combat encounters, non-stop. That made me barely have time to talk as my character, and the conspiracy theory that the DM had purposefully not given me the right card was starting to get to me, which I would understand if he had just changed it for another positive card, fearing that the wish one could break his game, though he could have just asked me nicely not to. But after all of those, I just made some excuse and left the table. Well, in regards to Barbarian being a that guy or not, I feel pretty confident in saying that he was most definitely a that guy, with a pretty decent sized scoop of murder hobo added in. Between how he handled the thieving kids, interacting with that one NPC, and everything else, I don't know what else to call him other than that guy. And as for the DM, that whole deal with giving permanent exhaustion to a player due to not being able to make it to a few sessions, and even having it be carried over to new characters, is one of the most extreme punishments I've ever heard in regards to D&D. And I'm surprised that he even thought that OP, or anyone for that matter, would stick around after that. I mean, just with that, I wouldn't be surprised if he did actually see that OP pulled out the wish card on the deck of many things, and just decided to make it be the skull card. In that situation, I would have actually brought up the numbers that were in the book, and while I understand it could have been possible that he was looking at a different guide, I still wouldn't consider it bad table manners to verify that that was the case. Overall, with everything that was happening in this game, I don't blame OP for just leaving. There is no point in staying in a game that you're not having fun with. Let's move on. I DM'd for a horny bard, and it was terrible. By Reddit user, Commercial Warning 271. I DM'd once for a horny bard that just wouldn't quit, and it was not fun for me. Instead of writing some long post detailing the entire length of my short and grueling campaign, I'm just going to talk about what made the whole length of the campaign awkward. Verity, the Tiefling Bard. The party, midway through the campaign, shocked me by joining up with my BBEG, which was totally awesome by the way. However, To prove themselves to the big bad, they needed to do a job for him. They needed to track down a band of troublesome defectors and kill them all. You know, the usual kill quest. However, the BBEG didn't entirely have reason to trust the party yet, so he assigned his lieutenant, a Null Barbarian, to assist and keep tabs on the party. The Bard was instantly attracted to this Null like you would not believe, despite her character being married and a mother, and the player's real-life husband was playing the party's paladin. Verity wanted to bang this Null. No, she needed to bang this Null. This would be the player's priority until the campaign ended. The Bard was making move after move on this Null every chance she had. It would not stop. The very plot of the campaign was lost to Verity. The party was stranded on the cursed island of GTFO, and that no longer mattered to her because they were stranded together, possibly forever, which was bad for me. I wanted the campaign stakes to be high, but I'm the DM. The stakes shouldn't be weighted against me like this. Eventually, the party finds the defectors and combat begins. Things went horribly, and if it hadn't been for the Null tanking hits for the party, it was looking like a TPK. Though the sorcerer died and was eaten alive by a giant hyena. In order to make the combat easier with the hopes of avoiding the imminent TPK, I had two of the defectors flee from combat. But what was going to save the party was the other two players agreeing to retreat, which was a good idea. What went wrong though? The Bard wanted to dash to the far end of the room and loot the 3 chests that I had described. You know, the exact opposite of retreating. Here is the literal definition of the word retreat, copy-pasted if you were wondering. An act of moving back or withdrawing. And there it is. And wouldn't you know it, the Bard picks the middle chest. The middle chest was a mimic that I had put there to surprise the party after the fight. You know, the time you should be looting, not before. I sigh, pause for a moment, and then describe the chest bearing teeth and biting down on the Bard's forearms, with only 2 hit points remaining. Luckily, through the combined effort of the Null and the Paladin, they were able to separate the two, and the Bard succeeded on her death saves. I described one of the Null defectors mounting one of the giant hyenas, and whoa, stop, I hear. Mount? You know, as in mount a horse, or summon your mount in an MMORPG. This is what any normal person would think when you say mount, though my players thought I was describing an open sex act. If you couldn't tell by this, my players are not normal people. After clearing this up, though this shouldn't have been a thing, I described the enemy Null riding away. This is a retreat. This needed to be said. Fortunately, the party and the Null were able to knock him off his mount and finish the job. Afterwards, the party looted the room and somehow lost a magic item. Yes, this is what happened. The Paladin opened up chest number 1 and cast Detect Magic. I tell him that the chest contained rusted -1 weapons that looked like they weren't going to help him. So then, the Paladin opens up chest number 3, and it contains a few gold pieces, rubies, and a good-looking bag. Though the Paladin ignores this loot because he doesn't want to haul it all. Yes, the party had just passed up a Ruby of the War Mage and a bag of holding which could have been used to haul everything. I even dropped some hints, which were ignored. The party leaves the body of the sorcerer, and he had the Paladin's magic sword, and it's still there to this day. When the party leaves the building, the Paladin tries to carry the Bard, but rolls low, so the Null Barbarian carries her. I wake up and passionately kiss him, says the Bard. No, you are unconscious for a few hours, I responded. The following session, the Bard nearly dies again. The sorcerer makes a deal with the devil and nearly kills himself again. And the job is done, meaning their job for the big bad. Verity is still on a mission to get boned. Now, you might be wondering, who is this mysterious Null Barbarian? Is he handsome? Is he gentle? Is he even romance material? No, no, and no. None of the above. It is at this point that I have the bard roll insight on this barbarian to figure out his agenda, and she rolled a nat freaking 20. So I tell her, he is a brutal killer that feels absolutely nothing towards you. He looks up to his boss and is here to make sure that you don't lie about the completion of the job. Now, you would think that the power of the nat 20 insight check would mean that the information given to you is uncontestable, right? No. The bard's player did not believe me. You heard that right. The bard did not believe what I, the DM, was telling her. I told her that this was absolute. The ship had sunk. This was canon. And she didn't believe me. The worst part about the gnoll was his name. What was his name? Bone. Yes, it was Bone. That was it. The bard wanted to bone Bone. I got inspiration for the name from the Warrior Cat series. It's great, by the way. 10 out of 10 would recommend. But back on topic. Why did I have to pick Bone? Why? Now, the most important thing I have to say during the climax of the story is my relationship with the bard. Why was I so reluctant to just humor her? Why? Well, the paladin was my father, the sorcerer and problem player was my brother, and the bard was my mother. Yep, this whole time, this was a family campaign, and my mother wanted to get intimate with a fictional character played by me. Any normal person would try to shut this down, and I did. But I am the only normal person in the family of not-so-normal people. For better or for worse, the campaign ended horribly, and we were all angry at each other for some time. After about 2 months for everyone to cool down, I asked my mother whatever happened to Verity. It's her character, right? She should decide. And she said that Verity boned Bone, and they were together now. God frickin' damn it. It has been at least 4 years, and I'm starting up a new Pathfinder campaign with my parents, grandparents, but without my brother, which is a horror story for another day. This time, there will absolutely be no flirting with the DM when we return to the island. None. Not happening. And although this is a sequel campaign, Verity will not be returning. I don't care that she's probably still alive. She is the new Sir, not appearing in this campaign. Well, I can certainly see how that could be a bit awkward. Sure, one could say that it's just roleplay, and not that big of a deal. Though it's one thing to roleplay romance plots with players that are friends, but I think anyone would be a bit put off by doing so with family members, especially parents. I would say that the best course of action in this situation would have been for OP to just talk to their mom privately out of game, and just tell her how it was making things uncomfortably awkward. In all likelihood, she would have probably stopped after that. Though I will give OP a bit of credit in trying to circumvent it with that insight check, and flat out saying that the gnoll had absolutely no interest. But even then, Bard still didn't believe it and kept up her pursuit. It kinda reminds me of when you watch those videos about people getting catfished, and their family shows all the evidence that they're being scammed, but yet the victim still believes that the person is real. Thankfully, it sounds like this whole ordeal is in the past, and OP is up to starting a new game, and even including their grandparents. Though hopefully, they don't come up with an enticing NPC that their grandmother wants to pursue. That would be doubly awkward. But with that, it's about that time where we cap off this week of D&D Cringe with a nice D&D glory story. Johnny Cage Would Be Proud by Reddit user ReputationLow5190. This isn't super horrific, but I wasn't sure where else to put this. I don't blame the player, since I'm the one who allowed this to happen. For the past couple months, I've been running a Curse of Strahd game for a few friends of friends. One player asked before we started the campaign if his monk could have a homebrew ability he invented called Low Blow. This ability basically meant that if his opponent rolled a nat 1 on their stunning strike saving throw, The monk could spend another key point to punch them in the groin, instantly incapacitating them non-fatally. This ability only worked on humanoid enemies with working male anatomy that were of equal or greater size than him. Like the fool I am, I said yes, thinking that there were enough caveats that he would rarely, if ever, get to pull it off. 3 guesses on how the fight with Strahd ended. The look of childish glee that spread across his face as he saw that nat 1 and realized that he would go down in history as the monk who defeated Strahd with a punch to the balls will forever haunt my nightmares. Edit. To everyone asking why I did not use Strahd's legendary resistance, I was in such utter shock that Monk had pulled off his low blow on the BBEG that I completely forgot about it. Also, the whole table was so ecstatic that he pulled it off that it would have felt like a huge dick move, no pun intended, on my part. Well, I would say that is a legendary way to defeat one of the most well-known D&D antagonists that I have ever heard about. Just back down and front kick that vampire into oblivion. Sure, OP stated that he forgot about the legendary resistance, but if I were in his shoes, I may have just let it happen anyway, especially with seeing how everyone was having a blast with it. Plus, now OP and the other players aren't likely to forget about that epic fatality. But that is all I have for you today. As always, I appreciate all of you. And remember, fun is the #1 goal of any game of Dungeons & Dragons. Until next time.